welcome to the Civil War Digital Digest. I'm your host, Jeremy, and I'm here this time with Matt Van Acker, who's the co-chair of the Save the Flags project for the state of Michigan. And we're going to be talking about why flags were so important during the Civil War. The American flag has been and is still important, but the Civil War flags in this era seem to have a little bit more importance to them, a little bit more further meaning. So Matt, can you tell me a little bit about when we're often reading and talking about the Civil War era, the significance of the flags comes up often. Why is that?
Sure does, yeah. You know, both the Northern and the Southern troops had a real affection for the battle flags that they fought behind and beneath during the war. These flags were presented to the men of the regiments by the communities from which they had come. They were a direct, tangible link to their families, to their country, to the reason they were fighting and dying during the war. Quite often these battle flags were presented to the men by the communities they came from in these grand ceremonies, well-attended ceremonies. Some of these flag presentation ceremonies would have thousands of people come out. The governors of the states would come and be a part of the flag presentation ceremony. When the men received what they affectionately referred to as the colors, and I love the term the colors because it does denote an affection that the men had for the flag. They're not just calling it the flags, it's their colors, the regimental colors. But when they were presented with these colors, their flags, they would make promises in these grand speeches at these ceremonies, and they would say things like, this flag will become the pall, the funeral garment of the regiment before we'll surrender it to the enemy. It's important too to recognize how these regiments formed. These men knew each other. These men, these companies, 100 men in a company, 1,000 men in a regiment, formed in specific parts of the states. These were boys that they'd grown up with. These were boys that they'd gone to school with, boys that they'd visited in church with. They were relatives. There were fathers and grandfathers in some of these regiments fighting along their sons and grandsons. There were sets of brothers. The 24th Michigan had 135 sets of brothers that fought for them. So these were a tangible piece of who they were, and that's why they were so important emotionally. Physically, logistically, they were hugely important on the battlefield. The only way a regiment could keep its alignment on the battlefield was by being with their colors. I don't need to explain the horrific things that these men were going through on the battlefields of the war. Smoky, dusty, confusing, men screaming, cannons being fired, rifles being fired. The only way you could keep your proper alignment in battle, they had no modern communication techniques, was by being with your flag. As the colonel's order was given to the color guard and to the color company and then to the color bearer to move forward, they would move forward. The men of the regiment would follow them forward into combat. If the color bearer took his staff out of his holster and planted it in the ground, every man of the regiment knew their job was to defend that battle flag and their position on the battlefield to the last man, if necessary. Incredible acts of courage took place under these battle flags. They weren't going to be surrendered. Being a flag bearer was one of the most dangerous duties of any man of the regiment, and yet there was no shortage of men that were willing to volunteer for the duty. It was considered an honor to be the flag bearer for your regiment. Death rates were incredible for the flag bearers and for the color guard because both sides recognized the importance of these flags, and they knew the quickest way to dishearten and confuse the enemy was by either shooting the color bearer or, even better, capturing the enemy's colors, their battle flags.
Can you recall anything specific from some of the men themselves, some of their own words of what they had to say about their flags?
Yeah, there are a number of quotes, and I hope I do justice to them, but they show, again, the affection that the men had for these flags and how they recognized their importance on the battlefield. There was an incredibly moving quote from a man by the name of Willard Eaton, who fought with the 13th Michigan Infantry Regiment, which formed in Kalamazoo. Eaton started low in the ranks, and through the course of the war kept being promoted. And after the Battle of Chickamauga in September of 1863, Eaton wrote a letter home to his niece, And he said in the letter, I'll paraphrase, and he said, you speak about guarding the flag. He said, I know that there are thousands of people that have but little understanding of the importance of these flags in battle. And he said, let such go and follow these flags into battle, into the storm of death, and have half of your men killed fighting beneath it. And then you will begin to appreciate the importance that these flags had. There was a quote also from an officer who'd fought with the 1st Michigan Cavalry Regiment, and he'd sent their standard home to Michigan because it had seen so much use. They couldn't follow it into battle anymore. It had been shot to shreds. And accompanying the flag, he sent a letter, and he said, sirs, I have the honor to forward to you the tattered standard of our regiment. Where, when, and how well we have defended it will let the history of the war tell. It's flown over many a bloody field. It's been pierced by rifle and canister shot. Yet, sirs, we trust that we have never forsaken or dishonored it. We venerate, we almost worship it.
What came to happen to some of the flags in general that these men felt so strongly about?
Sure. So at the end of the war, there was a grand ceremony in the Campus Martius in the middle of Detroit, and July 4th, 1866. And the Michigan regiments, in this case, were requested by the state to return their battle flags to the care of the state of Michigan. And there were similar ceremonies taking place all around the northern states where the regiments were returning their battle flags to the respective states. On that very hot day in July, our governor at the time, Henry Crapo, made his own solemn pledge to the men. He said that these flags will not be forgotten and their histories left unwritten. He said, let us tenderly deposit them in the archives of our state, her proudest possessions. According to Crapo, these flags were mementos of friends lost and a country saved. Now, not all of the flags were returned that day in 1866. Some of the regiments, shall we say, were reluctant to turn over their battle flags to the care of the state. Couple of recollections I have, especially of the 4th Michigan Infantry Regiment. They held on to their flag for a number of years, and it would periodically show up at the reunions. And they would write about these reunions in the local papers. And there was a recollection of one of those reunions in Jonesville and in the 1890s. And they said that the man who was assigned to take the flag up to the speaker's platform at the reunion took it up. And they said he grew very quiet and just stood with his hands trembling and his eyes growing moist. And he said, boys, do you see that flag, how it talks?
I'm almost speechless. I can see it meant so much to them. Many of them took clippings off the flags.
They did.
And
they
wanted
did.
a piece of that to bring back with them.
Some of our flags have stars that have been neatly snipped out of them before they were returned to the state. Some of the flags are not in the collection because we have a feeling they were probably buried with the last members of the regiment when they passed away. And they had such an affection for these flags. They were, as we mentioned earlier, a connection to the communities, but they stood for so much more. They stood for the men who fought and died beneath them, their comrades. These men who were fortunate enough to come back to the state at the end of the war, who survived the horror of the war, came back, I have no doubt, changed from the experience that they'd gone through. Burdened, probably, by the guilt that they must have felt for their most audacious act of surviving while so many of their friends died around them, boys that they'd grown up with. These boys who lost their lives and never came home, never had the chance to see their sons grown to honorable manhood, never had the chance to walk their daughters down the aisle on the day of their wedding, never got the chance, these were boys, never got the chance to become men. And the men that did survive, these flags were a tangible link. They were so important to these men. When our Capitol first opened in 1879 in Lansing, some of the first visitors to come to the building were the old veterans who came to see the Capitol, but in my opinion came to see their battle flags. Part of the reason our Capitol was built the way it was to have a fitting place to display them. And we have recollections of the gray-bearded gentleman literally pressing their faces up against the glass cases in the military museum to just catch a glimpse of their battle flag and coming to tears at the sight of them.
It's perhaps getting that one last look of something that they loved so much.
Exactly, exactly.
Matt, thank you for taking the time.
Oh, thank you
talk with
thank
me.
you. It's my
I found
pleasure.
this to be an emotional episode for the Civil War Digest. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did talking with Matt Van Acker. It's very moving being surrounded also by the flags that are all around us right now from the state of Michigan.